The stagecoach wheels spat red dust into the cold Nevada air. It was October 1867, and in this god-forsaken corner of the world, a place called Cedar Ridge, a ghost was about to be born. Violet Ashworth watched from the dirty window as the town materialized from the haze. Her hands, clammy and cold, clutched a small leather bag. Inside that bag was her entire life. Outside the window was her entire future, and she was terrified of both. The driver's voice cracked through the noise like a whip. Cedar Ridge, last stop for anyone crazy enough to call this place home. He laughed, a rough, broken sound that made Violet's stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. This was it. There was no going back. She was a piece of mail delivered to a man she'd never met. She stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, her legs feeling like jelly after 3 days of being shaken and rattled. The wind was a wild thing here. It tore at her simple blue dress, trying to pull the pins from her carefully braided hair. The whole world smelled different. It smelled like dust and smoke, and a wildness she had no name for. And then a voice, surprisingly kind. "You look lost, miss." An old woman with eyes that had seen everything and hands dusted with flour stood beside her. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. I run the boarding house just down the street." "I'm Violet Ashworth," she said, her own voice a whisper, almost stolen by the wind. "I'm here to marry Mr. Jeremiah Caldwell." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot into her hairline. The mail-order bride. Well, I'll be. Then the first piece of her new life fell into place, and it was jagged and sharp. Jeremiah's out on a cattle drive. Won't be back for another week. Another week, in a town where she knew no one. Mrs. Patterson grabbed Violet's heavy bag as if it were filled with feathers. "Come along, dear. You'll need a place to stay. Let's get you settled." As they walked down the main street, Violet felt 100 pairs of eyes on her back. Cowboys outside the saloon fell silent. Women in fancy dresses whispered behind their hands. A little boy pointed until his mother slapped his hand down. They weren't just looking at a new face. They were looking at a product, a woman who had been bought and paid for through the mail. "Don't you mind them," Mrs. Patterson said, but her voice was tight. "We don't get many strangers, especially not pretty young ladies like yourself." The boarding house was a tired, 2-story building, its white paint peeling away under the relentless sun and wind. Inside, it smelled of baking bread and soap, a scent so wholesome it made Violet's secret feel even darker, even dirtier. Her room was small, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out over the town that was now her cage. "Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway. "There's a general store, a church, and a doctor's office if you need anything. The folks here are good enough, I suppose, just curious." Alone, Violet unpacked. She hung her best dress, the green one she'd planned to wear for her wedding, in a closet that smelled of mothballs and other people's lives. Her hands shook as she smoothed the fabric. What if he didn't like her? What if he took one look at her and saw the same thing she saw in the mirror every morning? Broken. She pulled out his letters, the ink bold and clear, the words a lifeline she'd clung to for months. "I need a wife who can work hard and isn't afraid of frontier life. I can provide a good home for the right woman." He was offering her a home, a new life, but she was bringing him a lie, a secret buried so deep inside her body that she prayed to God it would never find its way out. That night, lying in the dark, she listened to the sounds of Cedar Ridge, a dog barking, the wind rattling the window pane, laughter from the saloon, loud and mocking. She had run from the crowded, noisy streets of Boston, from the shame of her father's gambling debts, and the men who had come to collect after he died. She'd run from the factory, from the endless hours and the grimy, hopeless future it offered. She had chosen this. She had chosen to be a mail-order bride. But as the desert stars glittered in the vast, empty sky, she wondered if she hadn't just traded one prison for another. What if Jeremiah Caldwell discovered she wasn't the right woman? What if he discovered she was damaged goods? 3 days later, she woke up in hell. A searing pain ripped through her stomach, so sharp and violent it stole her breath. She tried to stand, but the room tilted and spun, throwing her back onto the sweat-soaked sheets. She pressed a hand to her middle, and her fingers came away wet and red. Her heart didn't just stop, it shattered. This wasn't her monthly trouble. This was something else, something monstrous. The bleeding was heavy, relentless. A fever was building behind her eyes, making her hands tremble as she tried to clean herself up, to hide the evidence of her body's betrayal. She couldn't let anyone know. She couldn't. What would Mrs. Patterson think? What would Jeremiah think? Men on the frontier needed strong wives, wives who could work hard and bear sons. They didn't want this. They didn't want a woman who was broken inside, who bled for no reason, who was plagued by a shameful, secret sickness nice women didn't even have words for. She thought about her past, about the fall in Boston. A simple accident, they'd said, a tumble down a flight of icy stairs when she was 16. But ever since, her body had been a stranger to her, full of pain and unpredictable betrayals. It was her secret shame, the reason she could never marry a man from home, the reason she'd answered an ad for a husband 1,000 miles away. She'd hoped the clean desert air would fix her, heal her. Instead, it was making everything worse. By noon, the pain was a hot, twisting knife in her gut. She somehow made it to the dining room, picking at her soup, trying to smile, trying to act normal. But Mrs. Patterson's kind eyes saw too much. "You look pale as a sheet, dear," the older woman said, her voice laced with concern. "Are you feeling poorly?" "Just tired from the journey," Violet lied. The smile felt like cracking plaster on her face. She tried to stand up. Her legs buckled. The room swam in black spots. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "That's it. You're going to see Dr. Whitmore. Right now." "No!" The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. Everyone stared. "I mean, I'm sure I'll be fine. I just need to rest." But Mrs. Patterson was already on her feet, her face set like stone. "Honey, I've raised 4 daughters. I know when a woman needs a doctor, and you need one. Now." The walk to the doctor's office was a nightmare. Every step was an agony. The world was a blurry, pain-filled haze. Mrs. Patterson held her arm, chattering about the weather, but Violet could feel the woman's worry, a heavy weight between them. The sign on the neat white building read, Dr. Marcus Whitmore, physician and surgeon. Her stomach plummeted. A surgeon. What if he wanted to cut her open? What if he exposed her secret for the whole town to see? Jeremiah would hear about it. He would cancel the arrangement. He would send her back in disgrace. Mrs. Patterson knocked. A calm voice called, "Come in." The man who opened the door was not what she expected. He wasn't some old grizzled frontier sawbones. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and the kindest brown eyes she had ever seen. His clothes were clean, well made. He looked like he belonged in a Boston parlor, not a dusty Nevada town. His office was just as surprising. It was clean, orderly, filled with shelves of thick medical books and gleaming instruments that looked terrifyingly expensive. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his smile gentle. "What brings you here?" "This is Miss Ashworth," Mrs. Patterson said, pushing Violet gently forward. "She's not feeling well. She needs your help." Dr. Whitmore's gaze fell on Violet, and for the first time, she felt like a person, not a problem. "Please sit down. Tell me what's troubling you." She sat on the edge of a chair, a trapped bird ready to bolt. How could she say the words? How could she describe this intimate, horrifying betrayal of her own body to this handsome stranger? Her face was on fire. She stared at her hands twisted together in her lap. "Take your time," he said, his voice soft as rain. "Whatever it is, I'm here to help, not to judge." Something in his voice, in his patient kindness, unlocked the words. Haltingly, her cheeks burning with shame, she told him everything. The pain, the bleeding, the fever. She braced herself for the look of disgust, of clinical dismissal. But it never came. His expression remained calm, professional, and deeply concerned. When she finished, a raw, painful silence filled the room. He was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Then he stood and pulled a thick, leather-bound book from a shelf. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice gentle but firm. What you're describing is a medical condition. It has a name. It is not a moral failing. It is not something to be ashamed of. Violet looked up, her own eyes filling with tears. You mean I'm not broken? Certainly not. His voice was absolute. You are a woman with a health concern. Nothing more and nothing less. For the first time in years, Violet felt like she could breathe. A tiny, fragile bud of hope began to unfurl in her chest. But as Dr. Whitmore explained the condition, a complication from her old injury, and wrote out a prescription for a special herbal medicine from Mrs. Chen's shop, a new question began to form in her mind. Why was a doctor this brilliant, this refined, this compassionate, practicing medicine in a place like Cedar Ridge? And why did his kindness make her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with her fever? He was a mystery, a gentleman in a town of roughnecks, and she had a terrible feeling that some mysteries were better left unsolved. The medicine was as bitter as burnt bark, but it was a miracle. Within 2 days, the pain receded to a dull ache. The bleeding slowed. The fever broke. Violet felt like she had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. She walked to Dr. Whitmore's office on Thursday morning, her steps steady, her head clear. The autumn sun was warm on her face, and for the first time, she noticed the stark, rugged beauty of the desert landscape. Much better, Dr. Whitmore said, his voice warm with approval as he checked her pulse. His fingers were surprisingly soft, his touch gentle. Your color has returned. Your temperature is normal. Violet found herself studying his hands. There were no calluses, no scars. His fingernails were clean, perfectly trimmed. She noticed a heavy gold signet ring on his pinky finger, intricately carved with a family crest she didn't recognize. Everything about him was a contradiction. Dr. Whitmore, she said, choosing her words carefully, forgive me for asking, but how did you end up in Cedar Ridge? You seem like you'd be more at home in San Francisco, or back east. His hands stilled for a fraction of a second. A shadow passed over his kind eyes. Sometimes life takes us where we need to be, not where we plan to go, he said, turning away to wash his hands in a porcelain basin, the kind she'd only ever seen in the finest houses in Boston. I came west for a fresh start, just like you. But it wasn't an answer. It was an evasion. She watched him move around the office. He handled his expensive instruments with an easy, practiced grace. The books on his shelves weren't just medical texts. She saw poetry, philosophy, classic literature. There were more books in this small office than in the entire town library back home. You have more books than some libraries, she commented, trying a different approach. He smiled, but it was a sad, lonely smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Reading helps pass the long winter nights. This town doesn't offer much in the way of intellectual stimulation. There was an ache in his voice, a loneliness that she recognized, that she felt deep in her own bones. It was the feeling of being surrounded by people, but being utterly, completely alone. Where are you from originally? She pressed, her curiosity overriding her shyness. Back east, he said, his answer quick and clipped. He began rearranging bottles on a shelf that was already perfectly organized. And you? What made a young woman from Boston agree to a frontier marriage with a stranger? Now it was her turn to deflect. She couldn't tell him about the debts, the shame, the terrifying lack of options. She couldn't tell him that marrying a stranger felt safer than staying home. I wanted something different, she said, echoing his own vague words. Their eyes met across the room, two strangers in a dusty town, both hiding from their pasts. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a spark of recognition that felt more intimate than any touch. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell. You should continue the medicine for another week, he said, his voice all business again as he scribbled on a prescription pad. He used a gleaming silver fountain pen, not a simple dip pen like everyone else. Even his handwriting was elegant, educated. She took the paper from him, their fingers brushing for a heartbeat. A jolt, sharp and warm, shot up her arm. Miss Ashworth, he said as she reached the door. His voice stopped her. If you ever need to talk about your condition or anything else, my door is always open. Walking back to the boarding house, her mind was a a wealthy, educated doctor hiding out in the middle of nowhere. What was he running from? A scandal? A broken heart? A crime? And why did she care so much? She was promised to another man, a man she had never even met. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Patterson found her in the parlor, staring out the window, her book forgotten in her lap. Dr. Whitmore took good care of you, I see, the older woman said with a knowing look. He's very skilled, Violet replied carefully. Mysterious, too, Mrs. Patterson said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Been here 2 years and nobody knows a thing about his past. Shows up one day with a wagon full of the finest medical equipment money can buy. Builds the nicest office in town, but never ever talks about where he came from. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. Money? Oh, heavens, yes, that man has money. Mark my words. Look at his clothes. Those instruments. That fancy ring. A simple frontier doctor can't afford all that on what folks around here can pay him. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Some say he's hiding. From the law, maybe. Or a woman. A young, handsome, rich fella like that doesn't just end up in Cedar Ridge by accident. That evening, Violet stood at her window, watching the lights come on across the town. A warm yellow glow spilled from Dr. Whitmore's office. She could see his silhouette moving inside, a lonely figure in a well-lit room. What secrets was he keeping behind those kind, sad eyes? And why did the thought of uncovering them feel more exciting and more terrifying than meeting her own future husband? Just before dawn on Saturday, the sound of thunder echoed through the streets. But it wasn't a storm. It was the sound of a dozen horses thundering into town. Violet rushed to her window. A group of dusty, hard-faced cowboys were dismounting in front of the saloon. Their leader was a giant of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, sitting atop a magnificent black stallion. Even from a distance, she could see the raw power in him, the way the other men watched him, deferred to him. She didn't need anyone to tell her who he was. Jeremiah Caldwell had come home. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fasten the buttons on her best blue dress. This was it, the moment of truth. The man who held her entire future in the palm of his calloused hand was waiting for her downstairs. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly. He's here, dear, in the parlor. Every step down the creaking staircase was an eternity. At the bottom, she paused, smoothed her dress, and took a breath that did nothing to calm the frantic bird beating against her ribs. Then she walked into the parlor. He was even bigger up close. He seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. His skin was weathered by the sun, his eyes a piercing ice blue. He wasn't handsome in the way Dr. Whitmore was. He was formidable, a force of nature like the desert wind itself. Miss Ashworth, he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and steady. I'm Jeremiah Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell. Her own voice was a pathetic squeak. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at her. His eyes moved over her from head to toe, a slow, deliberate assessment. He was judging her, like a rancher inspecting a new piece of livestock. She felt herself shrink under his gaze. You're smaller than I expected, he said finally. His tone was flat, impossible to read. But you look healthy enough. Mrs. Patterson says you've been settled in without any trouble. The casual mention of her health sent a jolt of ice through her veins. If he only knew. If he knew about the sickness, the secret shame, the visits to the doctor, would he still see her as healthy enough? Sit down, he commanded, gesturing to a chair before settling into the largest one himself, as if it were a throne. We have practical matters to discuss. For the next hour he interrogated her. It wasn't a conversation. It was an interview. For a job. The job of being his wife. He asked about her cooking skills, her sewing, her experience with animals, her constitution. He spoke of his ranch not as a home, but as an enterprise. I run 200 head of cattle with 6 men, he explained, his eyes never leaving her face. The work is brutal. My wife will cook for all of us. She'll tend the garden, mend the clothes, help with sick animals, and manage the household. It's not an easy life. Can you handle it? I'm a hard worker, she said, trying to inject some confidence into her voice. I'm willing to learn whatever you need me to know. Good. A curt nod. It was the closest thing to approval he'd offered. I don't have time for fancy city ways. I need a partner, a worker, someone who understands that survival comes before comfort. As he spoke, she couldn't stop comparing him to Marcus Whitmore. Where the doctor was gentle, Jeremiah was hard. Where the doctor was refined, Jeremiah was raw. Where Marcus made her feel seen, Jeremiah made her feel appraised, owned. The thought was so jarring, so unwelcome, she pushed it away. This was her future. This was the safety and security she had traveled 1,000 miles for. She should be grateful. The wedding will be next Saturday, he announced as if scheduling a delivery. That gives us a week. Reverend Matthews can perform the ceremony at the church. 1 week, in 7 days, she would be Mrs. Jeremiah Caldwell. The thought didn't bring relief or excitement. It brought a strange, hollow emptiness. Then his eyes narrowed. There's one more thing, he said, his voice dropping slightly. I heard you've been visiting the doctor since you arrived. The blood froze in her veins. The room felt suddenly cold. How? How could he possibly know? Of course, in a town this small, secrets had nowhere to hide. Just a minor illness from the journey, she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Dr. Whitmore said it was nothing to worry about. His icy blue eyes held hers, and she had the terrifying feeling he could see right through her. Doc Whitmore, he said, the name sounding like a curse on his tongue. He's got quite a reputation. Fancy Eastern doctor with his fancy books and expensive clothes. Some folks wonder what a man like that is really doing in Cedar Ridge. The way he said it, the suspicion in his voice made her strangely defensive. He seems very skilled. He helped me. I'm sure he did. There was a nasty insinuation in his tone, a dark undercurrent that made her skin crawl. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. Just remember this. Once we're married, you belong to me. You won't need to go running to other men for help. I take care of my own. The possessiveness in his voice was a physical thing, a chain tightening around her. She wanted to argue, to protest, but she just nodded. What could she say? He was her future husband. He was her only option. After he left, the parlor felt empty and cold. She had gotten exactly what she'd come for, a strong, capable husband who would provide for her. So why did it feel like she had just agreed to be locked in a cage? She looked out the window, toward the neat white building at the end of the street, where a light still burned in Dr. Whitmore's office. What would he think when he heard she was to be married in a week? Would he care? Or had she imagined that spark of connection, that moment of shared loneliness? 1 week. 7 days until her fate was sealed. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being sent back. She was afraid of having to stay. Tuesday morning sunlight streamed into Dr. Marcus Whitmore's office, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But Marcus saw none of it. His world had narrowed to the yellow piece of paper crackling in his trembling hand. A telegram. Father dying, heart failing. Return Philadelphia immediately. Stop. Family business needs air. Stop. Mother desperate. Stop. Uncle Robert. He sank into his leather chair, the paper falling from his numb fingers. 2 years. 2 years of hiding in this dusty, forgotten town. 2 years of playing the part of a simple frontier doctor. 2 years of running from the man he was supposed to be. And now his past had reached across the continent and wrapped a chain around his neck. He walked to the safe hidden behind a painting of the Sierra Nevada mountains. He spun the dial, the clicks echoing in the silent room. Inside lay the proof of his other life, stock certificates for the Whitmore Mining Company, worth more than this entire territory. Bank papers from Philadelphia, New York, London. His family hadn't just been rich. They had been powerful, and that power had a price he had refused to pay. A soft knock on his door made him jump. He slammed the safe shut, hiding the evidence of his lies. Come in. It was Violet. She stood in the doorway wearing a pale yellow dress. She looked like a wildflower that had somehow bloomed in the desert. Dr. Whitmore? I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Miss Ashworth, he said, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. In 4 days, she would belong to Jeremiah Caldwell. In 4 days, she would be gone from his life forever. The thought was a physical pain, a lance through his chest. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "Much better. Thanks to you." She stepped inside and he saw she was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. I, I brought you something. A thank you." He unwrapped it. Inside was a linen handkerchief, perfectly pressed. In the corner she had embroidered his initials, M.W., in a deep blue thread. The stitches were tiny, perfect. It was a beautiful, intimate gift. "Violet, this is lovely, but you didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "You were kind to me. When I was scared and sick, you treated me like a person, not like damaged goods." Looking at her quiet strength, her fierce vulnerability, his carefully constructed composure began to crumble. How could he leave? How could he go back to a world of lies and boardrooms and empty obligations when this woman, this real, brave, beautiful woman, was standing right here? But what choice did he have? "I heard about your engagement," he said, the words tasting like poison. "Congratulations. Jeremiah is a very fortunate man." A flicker of something, sadness, disappointment, crossed her face before she looked down at her hands. "Thank you. The wedding is on Saturday." An awkward, heavy silence stretched between them, a silence filled with all the things they couldn't say. He wanted to tell her everything, about his family, about the telegram, about the real reason he'd run away to Cedar Ridge. He'd left Philadelphia after a terrible mistake. A young patient, the daughter of a powerful senator, had died on his operating table from a reaction to the anesthetic. It hadn't been his fault, but the scandal had been vicious. Her family had vowed to ruin him, so he had vanished, hoping to find redemption in obscurity. He wanted to tell her that in helping her, he felt like he was finally healing himself. But what good would it do? She was promised to another man, and he was being summoned back to his gilded cage. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, her voice hesitant, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Are you happy here? In Cedar Ridge?" Her eyes were searching, seeing more than he wanted them to see. You seem like you're meant for bigger things." The question was a punch to the gut. Happy? He'd been content. He'd been useful. He'd been free from his family's suffocating expectations. But happiness? That had only started the day she walked into his office. "I've found a purpose here," he said carefully. "Sometimes that's more important than happiness." She nodded, a sad wisdom in her young eyes. "I suppose we all make choices based on what we think we should do, not what we truly want to do." Before he could ask what she meant, the office door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. Jeremiah Caldwell filled the doorway, his face a mask of thunderous rage. "Violet," he snarled, the name a weapon. "I've been looking for you. Mrs. Patterson said you came here." "I was just thanking the doctor for his help," Violet said, her voice trembling. Jeremiah's cold eyes swept the room, taking in the scene. The closed door, the intimate silence, the small wrapped gift on Marcus's desk. His gaze was a physical violation. "Seems like you've been doing a lot of thanking lately," he sneered. "This is the third time you've been here since I got back." "Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, standing to his full height. He wasn't as large as the rancher, but he would not be intimidated. Not when Violet was cowering like a frightened animal. "Miss Ashworth was suffering from a legitimate medical condition that required follow-up treatment. There has been nothing improper." "I'll decide what's improper when it comes to my future wife," Jeremiah roared, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of the pistol, holstered at his hip. The threat was unmistakable. Marcus realized with a chill that this man was not just possessive, he was dangerous. "Violet, we're leaving. Now." She scurried toward the door, but just before she left, she glanced back at Marcus. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and they were pleading. Pleading for what, he didn't know. Help? Escape? It was a look that would haunt him. A look that tore through his carefully constructed lies and forced him to face the truth. He couldn't leave her here with that monster. After they were gone, the little embroidered handkerchief sat on his desk, a symbol of everything he was about to lose. The telegram lay beside it, a symbol of everything he was supposed to be. duty and honor on one side, love and redemption on the other. He was trapped between two worlds, and he had a horrifying feeling that no matter which one he chose, someone was going to get hurt. Across town, Jeremiah was marching Violet down the main street like a prisoner. His fingers were clamped around her upper arm, a vise of iron. "Jeremiah, please. You're hurting me," she whispered, struggling to keep up with his long, angry strides. "People are watching." He stopped dead in the middle of the street, spinning her around to face him. His eyes were chips of blue ice. "Let them watch," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Maybe they'll learn what happens when a woman forgets her place." They were in front of the bank. Mr. Henderson was inside, pretending to count money, but his eyes were glued to the drama unfolding on his doorstep. "I don't understand why you're so angry," she said, her own voice shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Dr. Whitmore is a doctor. I was sick. He was a perfect gentleman." "Gentleman?" Jeremiah's laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. "A woman doesn't visit a man 3 times in 1 week unless she's looking for something more than medicine. Especially not a fancy city doctor who thinks he's too good for the rest of us." The accusation was so vile, so unjust, it felt like a physical slap. "How dare you?" she breathed. "Dr. Whitmore has shown me nothing but kindness and respect." "Kindness?" He spat the word. "I've seen the way you look at him, with your big sad eyes. And I've seen the way he looks at you. Don't you take me for a fool, Violet." Something inside her, a spark of defiance she thought had died long ago, ignited. "The only fool I see," she said, her voice rising, ringing out in the dusty street, "is a man so riddled with insecurity that he can't bear the thought of his own fiancée speaking to another man." The whole street went silent. The sound of her own angry voice shocked her. She had never spoken to anyone like that in her entire life. Jeremiah's face went white, then a mottled, furious red. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to strike her, right there in front of the whole town. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot and sour against her cheek. His whisper was more frightening than any shout. "The wedding is Saturday," he snarled, "and after it's done, you will learn to hold your tongue. You will learn to obey, and you will never, ever see that doctor again. I don't care what fancy ideas he's put in your head. You are going to be a rancher's wife, and you will act like one." He released her arm, leaving angry red marks on her skin. He turned and stalked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the street, the silent, staring eyes of Cedar Ridge judging her, condemning her. She had come here seeking a safe harbor. Instead, she had sailed directly into the heart of a storm, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The final, inevitable explosion happened on Thursday evening. It started, as most things in Cedar Ridge did, in Murphy's saloon. Jake Morrison, one of Jeremiah's ranch hands, was 3 whiskeys deep and feeling bold. "Heard tell that little mail-order bride of the boss's has been spending an awful lot of time at the fancy doctor's office," he slurred to the assembled crowd of miners and cowboys. "Maybe Jeremiah ain't the first man to stake a claim on that piece of property." The ugly laughter that followed was cut short by the swinging of the saloon doors. Dr. Marcus Whitmore stood there. He had been on his way to the general store, but Jake's loud, brutish voice had carried into the street. Something inside the calm, gentle doctor snapped. Witnesses would later say they'd never seen anything like it. Before anyone could react, Marcus crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbed Jake by the collar, and slammed him back against the bar. Bottles rattled, whiskey sloshed. "Take it back," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the stunned silence of the saloon like a surgeon's scalpel. It was cold, precise, and absolutely lethal. "You will apologize for speaking of a lady in that manner. Right now." Jake, sobered by the shock of having the soft-spoken doctor's knuckles digging into his throat, stammered, "Hey now, Doc, I was just—" "You were spreading vile, malicious lies," Marcus interrupted, his educated accent making each word a sharp, punishing blow. "And where I come from, men who do that are taught a lesson in manners." That's when Jeremiah appeared, pushing his way through the crowd, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Where you come from," he mocked, his voice dripping with contempt. "And where is that exactly, Doc? Because for 2 years you've been living here, and nobody knows a damn thing about you or your past." The saloon fell dead silent. The piano player's hands froze over the keys. Marcus released Jake and turned to face Jeremiah. The two men stood in the center of the room, the air between them crackling with hatred. "My past is my own business," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "Not when it involves my future wife." Jeremiah jabbed a finger into Marcus's chest. "I've been asking around about you. Funny thing, no one can figure out how a simple frontier doctor affords a silver fountain pen, a library of expensive books, and a solid gold ring on his finger." He leaned in, his voice a triumphant sneer. "Makes a man wonder what kind of business you're really in. Maybe you're not a doctor at all. Maybe you're a swindler, or a con man, running from the law back east." The accusation hung in the smoky air. Marcus's hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Everyone in the room braced for a fight. They expected the doctor to swing, to be knocked to the floor by the much larger rancher. But Marcus did something no one expected. He laughed, a short, bitter, humorless sound. "You want to know about my past, Caldwell?" he said, his voice suddenly loud, ringing with an authority no one in this town had ever heard from him before. "You want to know where I'm from? Fine, I'll tell you." He reached into his waistcoat, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a folded piece of paper. "My full name," he announced, his voice booming through the saloon, "is Dr. Marcus Alistair Whitmore. My family owns the Whitmore Mining Company of Philadelphia. We own silver mines in this very state that could swallow your pathetic little cattle ranch without even noticing." He unfolded the paper and slapped it down on the bar. It was a bank draft. "This," he said, "is a draft for $50,000. It's my quarterly allowance. I could buy this entire town, burn it to the ground for entertainment, and still have enough money left over to rebuild it twice." A collective gasp went through the room. $50,000. It was an astronomical sum, more money than all of them combined would ever see. Jeremiah's face went pale. The bully's confidence drained out of him, replaced by stunned disbelief. "I came here," Marcus continued, his voice shaking with a passion he'd kept buried for 2 long years, "because I was sick of a world where a man's worth is measured by his bank account. I came here because I wanted to heal people, not sign stock certificates. And yes, I have been treating Miss Ashworth for a private medical condition, because that is my job. It is my oath. Something a man like you, who sees women as property, could never possibly understand." Jeremiah, utterly humiliated but too proud to back down, sputtered, "Money doesn't change the fact that you've been sniffing around my woman." "Your woman?" Marcus's laugh was incredulous. "She is not a stray dog you've claimed, Caldwell. She is a human being, a woman of courage and character who deserves respect, not ownership." "She's mine after Saturday," Jeremiah roared, his desperation making him reckless. "And what if she doesn't want to be?" Marcus shot back, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What if she's only going through with this sham of a wedding because she's terrified, because she thinks she has no other choice? She gave her word." "Did she?" Marcus's eyes suddenly shifted toward the saloon doors. "Why don't we ask her?" Every head in the saloon turned. Violet stood in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. Her face was as white as a burial shroud. She had heard everything. The fight over her honor, Jeremiah's vile accusations, and Marcus's stunning, impossible confession. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a prince in hiding, richer than a king. "Violet," Marcus said, his voice softening, his eyes pleading with her. "You don't have to do this. You have a choice. You are not trapped." "Don't listen to him, Violet," Jeremiah commanded, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "He's filling your head with lies. He'll use you and leave you with nothing." She was trapped in the crossfire, the two most powerful men in her life, facing off over her future, with the entire town as their audience. One offered a life of brutal, possessive security, a cage but a predictable one. The other offered, what? An escape? Freedom? He was a stranger, a man of secrets and immense wealth. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? The pressure was unbearable. Her heart felt like it was going to explode. I need to think," she whispered, her voice cracking. And then she turned and fled, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a stunned saloon, two sworn enemies, and the shattered pieces of her own future. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun, and the prize was her. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain lashed against the boarding house, and thunder cracked the sky open. It was a perfect match for the tempest in Violet's soul. She sat on her bed, the green wedding dress laid out like a corpse beside her. She hadn't slept. She had just sat there in the dark, listening to the storm, her mind replaying the scene in the saloon over and over again. Marcus Whitmore was a millionaire, an heir to a mining empire. He had lied to her, to everyone, but he had also defended her. He had seen her as a person, not a possession. He had offered her a choice she was terrified to make. Just then, a slip of paper was pushed under her door. She crept over and picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. It was from Marcus. The morning train for San Francisco leaves at 8 a.m. There is a first-class ticket waiting for you at the station, under your name. No expectations, no obligations. Just a chance to choose a different life. For yourself, M.W. Her hands trembled. A ticket, a way out, an escape into a world she knew nothing about, with no one to depend on but herself. The alternative was Jeremiah, marriage to a man who had publicly humiliated her, a man whose love was indistinguishable from ownership. A sharp, angry knock rattled her door, making her jump. "Violet, open this door. We need to talk. Now." It was Jeremiah. His voice was hard, slurred with whiskey and rage. She slowly opened the door. He stood in the hall, dripping rainwater, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "Pack your things," he said, his voice a low growl. "We're leaving for the ranch. Today, not after the wedding." "But the ceremony is tomorrow." "The ceremony will happen at the ranch," he snarled. "Just the preacher and my men as witnesses. I'm done with this town. I'm done with my private business being the subject of public debate. You're coming with me now." Her blood ran cold. The ranch. Miles from town, miles from anywhere. She would be completely at his mercy, isolated, trapped. No Mrs. Patterson, no Dr. Whitmore. No one. "Jeremiah, I think we should wait, as we planned." His hands shot out and clamped around her wrist, his fingers digging into her flesh. "I don't give a damn what you think," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You seem to have forgotten the terms of our arrangement, Miss Ashworth. I bought and paid for a wife, and it's time you started acting like one." Through the window she could hear the distant rumble of the approaching train. It was 7:30. She had to make a choice. Right now. "All right," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. She pulled her wrist from his grasp. "Just give me a few minutes to gather my things." His eyes narrowed, searching her face for any sign of trickery. "5 minutes," he grunted, "and don't even think about running to your rich doctor friend. I've got 2 of my men watching his office. You're not getting away." He stomped back down the stairs to wait for her. Violet flew into action. Her mind, suddenly crystal clear, knew exactly what to do. She wasn't going to the ranch, and she wasn't running to Marcus for help. She was saving herself. She scribbled 2 quick notes, one for Jeremiah, one for Mrs. Patterson, leaving them on the bed. She grabbed her small carpet bag, stuffing into it only her most essential belongings. Then she did something the shy, timid girl from Boston would never have dreamed of doing. She climbed out the window. The drop to the back porch roof was short. The rain soaked her dress in seconds, but she didn't care. She scrambled down the trellis, her hands and dress tearing on the thorns of a rose bush. She kept to the back alleys, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drumbeat of war. Freedom, fear, freedom, fear. She was halfway to the station when she saw him. Marcus. He was standing in the rain across the street from his office. Not inside it. He was watching, waiting. Jeremiah's men were there, posted at his front door. But Marcus hadn't gone in. He was out in the open, a target. He was creating a diversion. For her. Their eyes met across the muddy street. In his gaze she saw desperation, hope, and a terrifying amount of courage. Then a roar from behind her shattered the morning. Violet! Jeremiah had found the note. She didn't think. She ran. She ran toward Marcus, toward the station, toward the sound of the train whistle that was her only hope. He met her halfway, grabbing her hand, his grip strong and sure. Are you sure? He shouted over the rain. Once you get on that train, there's no turning back. I can't promise you anything, except that you'll be free. That's all I want, she cried, surprised by the strength in her own voice. They ran together, splashing through the mud and puddles. Behind them she could hear the shouts of Jeremiah, the thunder of horses' hooves as his men gave chase. At the station, the train was hissing steam, ready to depart. Marcus shoved the ticket into her hand. San Francisco, he said, breathless. He pressed a small, heavy leather satchel into her other hand. There's money in here. Not charity. A loan. Enough to get you started. To build any life you want. What about you? She asked, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving him to face Jeremiah alone. I have to go back to Philadelphia, he said, his voice filled with a terrible regret. My father is dying. There are responsibilities I can't escape. But Violet, someday, when this is all settled, I will find you again, if you'll have me. The final whistle blew. The sound of galloping horses was getting closer, louder. Marcus, she said, her voice catching in her throat. It was never about your money. It was because you saw me. You saw that I wasn't broken. He cupped her face in his hands, the rain running down their faces like tears. You were never broken, Violet, he whispered fiercely. You were always whole. The horses skidded to a halt at the edge of the platform. Jeremiah and his men were here. Get on the train, go! Marcus yelled, pushing her toward the steps. She scrambled aboard the passenger car, then turned to look back through the window. Marcus stood on the platform alone, facing down Jeremiah and his 3 angry ranch hands. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but he stood his ground, a shield between her and the man who wanted to own her. The train lurched, then began to move. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched the scene unfold. She saw Jeremiah's furious, contorted face. She saw Marcus, standing tall and unyielding. She saw Jeremiah draw his pistol. The train picked up speed, the station, the town, the whole ugly chapter of her life blurring, shrinking, disappearing behind her. She was safe. She was free. But the last thing she saw before the train rounded a bend was the image of the brave, kind doctor who had saved her, standing alone against a backdrop of violence and hate. And she had no way of knowing if he was still alive. 6 months later, the gilded cage of the Whitmore mansion in Philadelphia was suffocating Marcus. He sat in his late father's cavernous study, surrounded by mahogany and leather, a stack of mining contracts on the desk in front of him. His father had passed away 3 weeks after his return. The funeral was a grand, somber affair reported in all the papers. Now by law and by birthright, Marcus was the sole heir and president of the Whitmore Mining Company. He was one of the richest, most powerful men in America, and he had never been more miserable. Marcus, dear, his mother, Margaret Whitmore, glided into the room. She was a woman who had weaponized elegance, a master of polite, relentless persuasion. Caroline Ashford is here for tea. You remember the senator's daughter? Such a lovely girl, such a perfect match. Marcus sighed. For months his mother had been parading a conveyor belt of perfect matches through the drawing room. Beautiful, wealthy, well-educated young women from the finest families. None of them had Violet's eyes. None of them had her quiet courage. Mother, I've told you, I'm not ready. Nonsense, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. You've mourned your father. Life must go on. The family name must continue. Carolyn Ashford entered in a rustle of expensive silk. She was exactly as advertised, golden-haired, blue-eyed, and flawless. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice like tinkling bells, my deepest condolences. Your father was a great man. They made small talk. The weather, a new book, mutual acquaintances. Caroline was charming, witty, intelligent. She was everything a man in his position was supposed to want. But as she chattered on about her charity balls and upcoming trip to Paris, Marcus's mind was 1,000 miles away, in a dusty town in Nevada. Had Violet made it to San Francisco? Was she safe? Was she happy? Did she ever, even for a moment, think of him? Mr. Whitmore, Caroline's voice cut through his thoughts. You seem a world away. Forgive me, Miss Ashford. I have a great deal on my mind. She leaned forward, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. Perhaps you need a distraction. I heard the most amusing rumor about you the other day. Marcus tensed. A rumor? That you spent the last 2 years hiding away in some dreadful little frontier town, playing doctor to cowboys and miners. She let out a delicate silvery laugh. Can you imagine? A Whitmore, roughing it in the wilderness. It's too absurd. And what, Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet, makes you so certain it's just a rumor? Her perfect smile faltered. Well, obviously, a man of your breeding, your education, you wouldn't waste your talents on such common people. It's simply not done. And in that moment, he saw her. He saw all of them. They weren't interested in Marcus the man. They were interested in Whitmore the name, the money, the position. They would never understand why he'd found more honor in setting a miner's broken leg than he ever had in a corporate boardroom. He had faced down Jeremiah Caldwell and his men on that train platform. The sheriff had intervened before blood was shed, but Marcus had made his point. He had stared into the face of raw, frontier violence and not flinched. He couldn't go back to being the man he was before. After he had politely but firmly ended the conversation with a stunned Caroline Ashford and endured a subsequent lecture from his mother on the importance of duty, he sat alone in his study. A telegram lay on his desk. It had arrived that morning. It was from Mrs. Patterson. Dr. Whitmore. Thought you should know. Jay Caldwell married banker's daughter last month. Moved to Denver. Stop. Heard from traveling salesman. A young lady matching Violet's description is working at a dress shop in San Francisco. Madame Rousseau's on Montgomery Street. Thriving. Stop. Hope you are well. Stop. He read it 3 times. His heart hammering against his ribs. Violet. She was alive. She was working. She was thriving. On her own. She had taken the chance he'd given her and built a life with it. A fierce, powerful pride swelled in his chest. That night, Marcus made a decision that would horrify his mother and scandalize Philadelphia society. He called his lawyers and business managers. He gave them a single, shocking instruction: begin the process of selling the Whitmore Mining Company. All of it. Liquidate every asset. Then he sat down and wrote a letter. My dearest Violet, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. Mrs. Patterson tells me you are in San Francisco, and I cannot express the relief and pride I feel knowing you have built a life for yourself. I meant what I said that day in Cedar Ridge. You were never broken. You have more strength and courage in your heart than any person I have ever known. I am settling my family's affairs here in Philadelphia. When my work is done, I will be free, and I would very much like to see you again. Not because you need saving. You have proven you are more than capable of saving yourself. But because I need you. You showed me what it means to be a good man. You showed me who I want to be, and that man is incomplete without you. I will be on the westbound train arriving in San Francisco on June 15th. If you are at the station to meet me, I will know my heart has found its home. If you are not, I will understand. You owe me nothing. With all my hope and affection, Marcus. He sealed the letter, his hand steady for the first time in months. He was walking away from an empire, from a world of unimaginable wealth and power. But he was walking towards something infinitely more valuable. He was walking toward a woman who had taught him the difference between a fortune and a future. And he was praying she would be there to meet him. The letter arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning at Madame Rousseau's Dress Emporium, the finest shop on Montgomery Street. When Violet saw the elegant, familiar script, her knees went weak. She had to sit down on a bolt of emerald green silk before she collapsed. He was coming. June 15th, that was 2 days from now. Mon Dieu, Violet, what is it? Madame Rousseau, a tiny, formidable Frenchwoman with a heart of gold, rushed to her side. You look like you have seen a ghost. Violet felt like she was seeing the future, a future she had been too afraid to even dream of. In the 6 months since she'd arrived in San Francisco, she had transformed. The timid, frightened girl from the stagecoach was gone. In her place was a confident young woman. Her skill with a needle and thread, particularly her delicate embroidery, had made her Madame Rousseau's most prized employee. She lived in a respectable boarding house with other working women. She had friends. She had savings. She was independent. She had done it. She had built a life for herself on her own terms. But at night, when the foghorns called from the bay, she would lie awake and think of a kind doctor with sad brown eyes. Now he was coming back, the rich, powerful man from a world she could never belong to. What did he want from her? That evening, she found herself walking along the waterfront with Mrs. Chin, the herbalist from Cedar Ridge. By a strange twist of fate, the old woman's nephew ran an apothecary in Chinatown, and she was visiting. Violet told her everything: the stunning escape, the new life, and the letter that now felt like a ticking bomb in her pocket. "You are afraid," Mrs. Chen said wisely, her dark eyes missing nothing. "But you are not afraid of him. You are afraid of yourself." "What do you mean?" "In Cedar Ridge, you were a girl who needed to be rescued," Mrs. Chen explained. "Here in San Francisco, you have rescued yourself. You are afraid that if you go to him, you will become that weak, helpless girl again." The old woman's words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was right. She was terrified of losing the strength she had fought so hard to find. But being strong enough to stand alone, Mrs. Chen added gently, and being strong enough to choose to stand with someone, are two different kinds of strength. One does not erase the other. 2 days later, on June 15th, Violet stood on the platform at the Southern Pacific Station. She wore her best dress, a simple but elegant blue gown she had made herself. Her heart was a hummingbird in her chest. She had almost run. That morning, she had packed her bags, ready to catch a stagecoach north to Oregon, to disappear again. But Mrs. Chen's words had echoed in her mind. The train's whistle blew, a mournful cry that signaled the arrival of her past, and possibly her future. Black smoke plumed on the horizon. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had met a proper society lady in Philadelphia? What if he took one look at her, a simple working woman, and felt nothing but regret? The massive locomotive hissed into the station, a beast of iron and steam. Passengers began to pour out, businessmen in fine suits, families with mountains of luggage. She scanned every face, her hopes sinking with each person who passed. He wasn't there. She had been a fool, a romantic, naive fool. She turned to leave, a tear of disappointment stinging her eye. "Violet." The voice, his voice. She spun around, and there he was, stepping down from the first-class car, carrying a single leather satchel. He looked different, older, more serious. He wore a simple, practical traveling suit, not the clothes of a millionaire, but his eyes. His eyes were the same warm, kind brown eyes that had seen her when she felt invisible. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the bustling platform, 1,000 unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. Then he smiled, and the whole world came into focus. "You came," he said, his voice filled with a wondrous disbelief. "You came," she whispered back. He dropped his bag and closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't kiss her. He just took both of her hands in his grip a warm, solid anchor in her swirling emotions. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've built such an incredible life for yourself. You don't need me." "That's true," she said, and a radiant, confident smile bloomed on her face. "I don't need you." She squeezed his hands. "But I have learned something important these last few months." "What's that?" "That being strong enough to stand alone doesn't mean I have to, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let themselves be loved." His answering smile was the brightest thing she had ever seen. "I have something to tell you," he said, his expression turning serious. "Something that might change your mind." "More secrets, Dr. Whitmore?" she teased. "One last one, I promise." He took a deep breath. "I sold it, the mining company, all of it. I am no longer the heir to the Whitmore fortune." Violet stared at him, stunned into silence. You gave it all up." "I kept enough to live on and to open a small medical practice. Wherever we might decide to settle, he said, his eyes searching hers, full of a raw vulnerability. I couldn't have you thinking I was trying to buy your affection. I couldn't have you wondering if you were just another one of my possessions. I needed you to choose me. Just me, not my money. She looked at this man who had walked away from an empire, just to prove to her that his love was real, to prove that he saw her as an equal. A single happy tear traced a path down her cheek. She stood on her tiptoes, leaned in close, and whispered in his ear. Marcus Whitmore, she said, her voice full of a love so deep and powerful it took her own breath away. I would have chosen you if you were the poorest man in America. 1 year later, the sign on the neat white building overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Monterey, California, read simply, Dr. and Mrs. Whitmore, Family Clinic. Inside, Marcus was examining a fisherman's broken arm, while Violet was calming the man's crying child with a piece of candy. They were partners. In the clinic, in their home, in their life. Their wedding had been a simple, beautiful affair in the garden of Madame Rousseau's shop. Their life was not one of wealth and luxury, but it was rich in ways that mattered, full of purpose, hard work, and a deep, abiding love. That evening they walked hand in hand on the beach as the sun set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. I got a letter from Mrs. Patterson today, Violet said, leaning her head on his shoulder. She says Cedar Ridge is getting a railroad spur next year. They're becoming quite civilized. And Jeremiah? Marcus asked quietly. She said he and his new wife lost a great deal of money in a bad investment in Denver. They had to sell the ranch. Violet's voice held no triumph, only a quiet finality. Justice, she had learned, was not always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it was just the quiet, inevitable consequence of a person's own character. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if I hadn't gotten sick that day? Marcus stopped and turned her to face him. He looked down at the strong, confident, radiant woman he was so proud to call his wife. I don't know, he said honestly, but I like to believe that two souls who are meant to be together will always find their way, no matter how broken the road may seem. Violet smiled, the last light of the sunset catching in her eyes. The shy, frightened mail-order bride was a ghost, a memory from another life. The woman standing here was whole, not because a man had fixed her, but because she had found the courage to mend herself. She had learned that true love doesn't repair you. It sees you, already perfect in your imperfections, and chooses you anyway. The story of Violet and Marcus is a powerful reminder that our worth isn't defined by our past, our secrets, or what others think of us. It's defined by our courage to choose our own path, even when we're terrified. If you were inspired by this story of healing and redemption, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next tale of secrets, lies, and the incredible strength of the human heart. And let me know in the comments below. What do you think is the bravest choice a person can make?